Daf Yomi, Tractate, Sanhedrin, page 65b, top of the page, with the words Mesiv Rebbe Zera. Yatsu Edim Zoimemin, Shein Bohem Aisem Amai, Ha-Lesinu Bale. Rebbe Zera raises an objection to Rav's answer, as it is stated in a Braita that one who unwittingly commits a transgression punishable by death is obligated to bring a sin offering, excluding conspiring witnesses who are not obligated to bring a sin offering, as their transgressions do not involve an action. Whereas Zera asks, and why is a false witness's testimony not considered a transgression that involves an action? The testimony is delivered through speech, which should be considered an action, as this is not a transgression that is committed in the heart. The witnesses are liable for what they said, and not for their intention only. Rava says conspiring witnesses are different, since their transgression is committed through their voice. The essence of their transgression is not speech itself, but rather making themselves heard by the court. Therefore, since the projection of one's voice does not involve an action, I think it does involve an action. A person needs to exert their muscles when they use their voice. It's still an action. They're still acting, opening their mouth. What about before? We had moving their lips. They have to move their lips. That's an action. Anyway, this is what Rava says. The transgression of conspiring witnesses is considered not to be involving action. Which I don't understand, but let's continue. The call the Rabbi Yochanan lav maisu up. Rabbi Yochanan asked the same thing. V'chal itmar chasam v'kol v'nigu v'kol v'nigu v'kol. Rabbi Yochanan amar chayav v'resh lakish amar patur. The Gemara asks, and is projecting one's voice not considered an action? According to Rabbi Yochanan, but wasn't it stated that Amoraim engaged in a dispute concerning the following case? If one muzzled an animal by projecting his voice, by berating it whenever it tried to eat, he has transgressed the prohibition of, you shall not muzzle an ox when it treads out the corn. Deuteronomy 25, verse 4. And similarly, if one led different species to work together by projecting his voice without performing any action, he has transgressed the prohibition of, you shall not plow an ox and a donkey together. Deuteronomy 22:10. Rabbi Yochanan says he is liable, and Reish Lakish says he is exempt. Rabbi Yochanan amar chayav akimat piv havimaise. Reish Lakish amar patur. The Gemara explains the reasoning behind their opinions. Rabbi Yochanan says he is liable, as he maintains, that the twisting of one's mouth to speak is considered an action, whereas Reish Lakish says he exempt because he holds that the twisting of one's mouth, you could just say moving their lips. But anyway, okay, that's how they decided to. Akimat piv, the twisting of one's mouth. Akimat piv, 7:16. Okay. Eventually, Rabbi Yochanan holds that a transgression one commits by projecting his voice is considered to involve an action. Okay. Ela amorave shani edim zavimin hoyel v'yeshnu b'riyah. Rather, Rava says there is a different answer to Rabbi Zera's objection. Conspiring witnesses are different, since they are rendered liable mainly through sight, meaning that the important part of their testimony is what they saw, which is not considered an action. Tanu Rabbanan bal'ov ze amedaber ben aprakim umiben etzile yadav yidoni ze maniach etzem yadua bepiv v'hu medaber me'elav. The sages taught a necromancer is one who causes the voice of the dead to be heard speaking from between his joints or from his armpit. A sorcerer, Yudoni, is one who places a bone of an animal called Yadua in his mouth, and the bone speaks on its own. I thought it would have been Etzem Yadua, a certain bone, a known bone. But they call it, the bone is called Yadua, okay? Etzem Yadua. I wonder what that gematria is. Etzem Yadua. The bone of Yadua is 290. Huh. Alright. Me'esvei. V'hayakov me'eretz kolech. מה אליו? משתהה כי הולכה? לא. דסליק ויסיף בין הפרקים ומשתהה. The Gemara raises objection from the verse, and your voice shall be as a ghost out of the ground. Isaiah 29 verse 4. What does the dead person not speak from the grave on his own? The Gemara answers, no, this is not so. As the dead person rises by sorcery and sits between the joints of the necromancer and speaks. So Shema V'atoimer ha'ish el Shaul Elohim re'is yo'elim min ha'oretz Ma ilav D'mishtay ki yocheh Lo D'yaseh ben ha'pachim mishtay. The Gemara suggests, come and hear a proof from the statement of the necromancer to King Saul. And the woman said to Saul, I see a godlike being coming up out of the earth. 1 Samuel 28:13. What, does the verse not mean to say that the dead person spoke on his own? The Gemara refutes this proof. No, this is not so. As the dead person sits between the joints of the necromancer and speaks. Tanu Rabbanon, Bal Oiv Echad Amale V'Zichroi. My benzi lazeh, my lebes uchoy, in oil kedalkoi, in oil b'Shabbos. Nisha bigel goiles, oil kedalkoi, oil b'Shabbos. The sages taught the category of a necromancer includes both one who raises the dead with his Zachor. Okay, I'm not sure. I mean, Zachor sounds like his Zachor sounds like a male organ, but they don't translate here. They just say Zachor. But what else could it mean? You know. So, I guess that's some form of sexual necromancy. I don't know. Maybe it's possible. They don't translate it. They just say Zachor. So that's what I'll conclude. But they say raise the dead with his Zachor. Okay. Which is a form of sorcery, and one who inquires about the future from a skull. Oh, maybe they raise the dead by the dead dudes thing. Anyway, okay. Or one who inquires by the future from a skull. What is the difference between this type of necromancer and that type of necromancer? One raises the dead with his Zachor. The dead does not rise in its usual manner, but appears upside down, and does not rise on Shabbat. In contrast, when one inquires about the future from a skull, the skull rises in its usual manner, and it rises even on Shabbat. Good to know. I'll keep that in mind next time. No, just kidding. Oile lehechel salik hakame manach elaim ma'one kedaraka be'on b'Shabbat. The Gemara asks, with regard to the wording of the last statement, rises, to where does it rise? Isn't the skull lying before him? Rather say as follows: the dead answers in its usual manner, and it answers oneh even on Shabbat. Not ole, but oneh. Okay. Change the letter, change the meaning. No problem. V'af she'ela zu shel tonus rufus aroshe. Es Rabbi Akiva. Amar lo, ima hayom yomayim. Amar lo, ma gvar miguvrin. Amar le, dimari tzveh. Shabbat nami dimari tzveh. With regard to the statement that the dead do not rise on Shabbat, the Gemara relates to wicked Turnus Rufus. The Roman governor of Judea asked this question of Rabbi Akiva as well. Turnus Rufus said to him, "And what makes this day, Shabbat, different from other days?" Rabbi Akiva said to him, "And what makes this man," referring to his interlocutor, "more distinguished than other men?" Turnus Rufus said to him, "I am more distinguished because my master, the emperor, wants it that way." Rabbi Akiva said to him, "Shabbat too is unique because my master wants it that way, and he has sanctified that day." Answering a question with a question. Amar le hachika minalach. Mi emar de'aidna shabbata. Amar lo nahar sabbatyon yochiach. Sabbatyon. Sabbatyon is Gematria 137. Sabbatyon. Nahar Sabbatyon yochiach, Baal ov yochiach, Kivro shel aviv yochiach, she'en male ashan b'Shabbat. Amar lo, bizito, biashto, v'kilalto. Turnus Rufus said to him, "This is what I mean to say to you. Who is to say that now is Shabbat? Perhaps a different day of the week is Shabbat." Rabbi Akiva said to him, "The Sabbatyon river can prove that today is Shabbat, as it is calm only on Shabbat. A necromancer can prove this, as the dead do not rise on Shabbat. The grave of his father," referring to Turnus Rufus' father, "can prove this, as it does not emit smoke on Shabbat. Although smoke rises from it all week, as during the week he is being punished in Gehenna." Turnus Rufus said to him, "You have demeaned my father, you have publicly shamed him, and you have cursed him by saying that he is being punished in Gehenna." Shoel ov, hainu, v'doire shel hameisim. The Gemara asks, isn't one who inquires about the future from a necromancer the same as what is described in the verse, one or directs inquiries to the dead, Deuteronomy 18:11? Why are they mentioned separately in the verse? Doire shel hameisim, k'detanya v'doire shel hameisim, זה מעריב עצמו, והולך כולן בבית הקברות, כדי שתשרה עליו רוח טומאה. The Gemara answers, one who directs inquiries to the dead employs a different method to contact the dead, as is taught in a Braita. One or directs inquiries to the dead. This is one who starves himself and goes and sleeps overnight in the graveyard, so that a spirit of impurity should settle upon him, and he can listen to what the dead are saying. כשהיה רבי עקיבא מגיע למקרה זה, היה בוכה. ומה מעריב את עצמו כדי שתשרה עליו רוח טומאה? שוער עליו רוח טומאה. המעריב עצמו היא כדי שתשרה עליו רוח הטהרה. על אחת כמה וכמה. אבל מה אעשה שבנושאנו גורמו לנו? שנאמר כי אם עוונותיכם היו מבדילים ביניכם לבין אלוהיכם. When Rabbi Akiva would arrive at this verse, he would weep and say, if one who starves himself so that a spirit of impurity will settle upon him succeeds in doing so, and a spirit of impurity settles upon him, all the more so one who starves himself so that a spirit of purity will settle upon him should be successful, and a spirit of purity should settle upon him. But what can I do? As our iniquities have caused us not to merit the spirit of sanctity and purity, as it is stated, but your iniquities have separated between you and your God, and your sins have hid his face from you, that he will not hear. Isaiah 59:2. Amorave Ibo Tzadiki Baramo Shinemar Ki Avonotechem Hayim Avdilim Legomer. Rava says, if the righteous wish to do so, they can create a world, as it is stated, but your iniquities have separated between you and your God. In other words, there is no distinction between God and a righteous person who has no sins. And just as God created the world, so can the righteous. Rava bara Gavra. It says that Rava created a man, a golem. Rava created golem. Wow. 6:12. Rava bara Gavra. 6:12. Minnesota. Makes me think of Minnesota. Bob Dylan's from Minnesota, I think. Wisconsin? No, Duluth, Minnesota, yeah. Rava bar Gavra shadre lekame drazera. Have kamishtai behade. Vilo have kamahadle. Amarle. Min chavaraya at hadar liafrech. Indeed, Rava created a man, a golem, using forces of sanctity. Rava sent his creation before Rabbi Zera. Rabbi Zera would speak to him, but he would not reply. Rabbi Zera said to him, you were created by one of the members of the group, one of the sages. Return to your dust. Rav Chanina v'Rav Yishahavi Yasivi Yasi kol male shabta Yaski b'sefer Yitziro Umibare lehu igla tilta Yachlele. The Gemara relates another fact, sustaining the statement that the righteous could create a world if they so desired. Rav Chanina and Rav Oshia would sit every Shabbat, Eve, and engage in the study of Sefer Yetzirah, and the third-born calf, Igla Tilta, would be created for them, and they would eat it on Shabbat. Umabri lehu. I don't know if that's okay. It was created for them, or they created. Anyway, Tanu Abanan. בעונה רבי שמעון אומר זה מעבר שבע מיני זכור על העין. בחכמים זה האוחז את העיניים. רבי עקיבא אומר זה המחשב איתים בשויס ואומר היום יפה לצייס. למחר יפה לכך. Limude alve shviois chitin yafois. Ikoi kitniois mios rois. The sages taught, what is the definition of a soothsayer? Mentioned in the verse. What is the definition of the soothsayer mentioned in the verse? There shall not be found among you a soothsayer. Deuteronomy 18:10. Rabbi Shimon says, okay, get ready for this one. This is one who applies 7 types of soimen. Yep, you heard that right, folks. Seed, male seed, to his eyes in order to perform sorcery. Ew. The rabbis say this is one who deceives the eyes as though he's performed a sorcery. Rabbi Akiva says this is one who calculates the fortune of times and hours and says, for example, today is a propitious day for going away on a journey. Tomorrow is a propitious day for purchasing property successfully. Or he says that on the eve of the sabbatical years, the wheat harvest is generally good at uprooting legumes rather than cutting them from above the ground prevents them from going bad. Tanarabana menachesh zoymer pitu nafnem bipiv makloy naf miyadoi benoi koiret eloi meacharov o erev koiret eloi tzvi hefsiko bederich nachash miminoi veshual bismoiloi. The sages taught in the enchanter mentioned in the verse in Deuteronomy 18:10 is one who relies on superstitious signs. For example, one who says, if one's bread fell from his mouth, that is a bad sign for him. Or if one's staff fell from his hand, it is a bad sign. Or if one's son calls him from behind, it is a sign that he should return to his journey. Or if a raven calls to him, or if a deer blocks him on the way, or if a snake is to his right, or if a fox is to his left. All of these are bad signs. An enchanter is one who relies on these as bad signs and consequently changes his course of action.